Hello, this is Jared from Commit Quality, and in this video we're going to go over the Playwright configuration file. So to enjoy all the features that Playwright Test has to offer, you're going to want to create a configuration file. Now, if you've used my setup video, you're already going to have a playwright.config.ts set up. However, if you haven't, I'll put a link to my video now on the screen. Pause this video, go have a look at that, and I suggest setting up using method 1 or 2 so you have this kind of scaffolding config set up for you. If for some reason you did do it manually, then there's an example in the Playwright documentation where you can create your own config file. But it's essentially create a new file, playwright.config.ts, and add in whatever you want into it. Before we get started walking through this then, what I want to say is I have actually cut down some of the config file so I can take you through the kind of core values that I think you're going to be, more focused on in your basic setup of your pack. Now, as I go through more videos, we're going to probably be adding more config values. However, the documentation is really great. So if I open up the Playwright documentation, if you go up to the top right and search for config, you'll see configuration link here. So you click on that and it'll take you to this documentation, which is fantastic. We're going to cover a lot of the basics here. However, I would suggest looking through this in more detail. Or if you do have a specific question, feel free to drop a comment and I will help you as much as I can in the comments. So let's jump right back into Visual Studio Code. The values we actually have inside here are all global, which means they're going to apply to every single test. Now, you can change these inside tests as well, which I'm going to touch on a little bit further into this video. However, it is worth noting whatever you set here will apply to all of your tests. So, like I said, I'm going to go through some of these basic values. However, if you do need to kind of refresh your memory on, what each one does, if you just hover over them, it gives you that basic example. So this test directory basically says that it's the directory that will be recursively scanned for test files. So it defaults to the directory of the configuration file. So in this case, what we're saying is all of our tests live inside this test folder. And using this config value, it's going to say scan everything inside tests to see what we should look at. The next value we have is the timeout. So this is the timeout for each test, and it's in milliseconds. I think when I set up the config using the scaffolding, it sets it at 30 for us. So your test will only be able to run for that 30 seconds, and that after then it's going to time out if it can't find anything. Of course, you can change this to whatever you want, and like I said, you can locally change this if you have a specific test that needs to be increased or decreased for whatever reason. Following on, we have this expect property here, and this object contains a value of timeout. And this is the default timeout. It's going to wait for your kind of web first assertions. So they've got an example here. When you do an expect locator to have text, by default, it's going to be set to 5 seconds. But if you need it to wait longer, or you need all of your tests to wait longer, you can set that to say 10 seconds and change that, and that'll apply, like I said, globally. And the key focus here is globally, it applies it to every test. So the next thing is the fully parallel property. Now, I've set this to true. So by default, Playwright will run your tests in parallel anyway, providing they are in different test files. So if I had multiple tests inside this basic test file, so I had four of these would run one after another. However, by setting this value fully parallel to true, what it's saying is everything should run in parallel. So even tests inside the basic test.test, they will all run in parallel. Now you've got to be careful with this, because if you've got a kind of bunch of tests with setup state or tear down, do some cleanup after your tests, I'm thinking of adding and then deleting of items. What you want to be careful of is if you run completely in parallel, those tests might become flaky or fail because you could be deleting something as you're adding another one, and then it could kind of fall into those kind of race conditions. So you want to be very careful with this value. If you don't set it, it'll be false by default. However, you do have this option to turn it on if you have tests that kind of don't rely on any kind of cleanup or setup. The next property I have is forbid only, and this is really great for me. If you don't know what only is, don't worry, there's an annotations video coming up. Quick description is, when you add .only to a test, you're saying when I kick off my test run, I only want to execute the tests with this annotation of .only. You don't want to do this when you're checking in code to your master branch. You want to run all of your tests, not the ones only marked as only, or I'd assume that's the case. Now, I forget a lot of the times to remove .only and then it gets picked up in a pull request. But what this option is doing is saying, don't allow only, you want to exit the test with an error if anything is marked up with a .only annotation. So in this case, we say in fail the build on CI, so we're using the process env CI variable here to say, okay, fail it if I've left the .only in my code. It's really useful, especially if you're like me and you forget to remove those kind of annotations. Moving on is retry. So you can state how many times you want to retry a failing test. So I think this came with a scaffold of you saying, if you're on the CI environment in your pipeline, do it twice, else only do it once. You can simplify this by just saying, do 3 retries every time, or you can say 0, 1, or remove it completely if you don't want any, and you can just do it that way. Obviously, very good to test your failing tests and see if you've got any kind of flaky tests or if they fail in all the time. So then you've got the workers, so how many workers you should use for parallelization. So hovering over again it's telling you the maximum number of concurrent worker processes to use for running in parallel. There's always at least one worker process, but like I said, more can be used to speed up test execution. And the default of this is defaults to 1/2 of the number of CPU cores. The next property we can talk about is the reporter. So we can say, how you want things to report on pass and failure. By default, we've got a setup as HTML. And this will actually open on failure as well, which is really cool. That comes straight out of the scaffolding that you have with Playwright. Now, I'm going to be doing a whole new video on, reporting in Playwright. But the options there to change it to whatever you want. If you want like as a JSON report or a list, you can completely change that. Then scrolling down, we have the output directory property, and we're saying this is where we want to spit out all of our kind of test results. So, this could be screenshots, videos, your trace zip files, which you might not know about right now, but that's a way of, debugging in a post-mortem manner. Really useful, and it'll create your kind of test results folder when the tests have started and on completion, and it'll clean it up all automatically for you as well. So it's just a really good config value to have in there, and by default, they set it to test results directory. What I like to do when I'm doing my kind of results is I like to say I want my HTML report to live inside this folder as well, and we'll show all that in a future video. So they are some of the kind of core properties you can have in your Playwright config. Now here we have this use object, and inside it we have some more values. So you've got action timer, which is the maximum time each action can take. By default we've said 0, so there's no limit. Playwright have already commented this really well, so I'm just reading back what they've done for us. We're also saying on our traces, like I said, there's going to be a debugging video around traces, but what we're saying is on our first retry, we want to create a trace file, so it won't create it on the first failure, it'll only do it on retry. Now of course you can change all these values, so if I delete that and I just say double quotes, it gives us the intelligence of exactly what you can do. So I can say I want it off for everything, maybe I want it on so it happens on everything. On first retry is what we just talked about, maybe on failure, or we can do a retry with trace. So let me undo this, just save that again. And then the last option I have is headless, so we're saying we want to run in headed mode because it's saying false. Now these properties inside this use object are all going to apply for every project we have down below. So this leads me to the next point, projects. And what are projects? So projects are a way to run across different browsers, environments. You can basically set up different test runs with different parameters. So you might want to run in Chromium, or you might want to run in WebKit, or it might be a case you want to run one in Chromium against a test environment, then you want to have another one in Chromium against a live environment. And that's what projects are going to do for you. And by default, they're going to use these default values in each project. And as you can see here, you can also override them. This is how you can choose if you want to run, desktop Chrome, Safari, you've got a mobile Safari emulation here as well, and we've got plenty others you can go through. Now, by default, if I was to run npx playwright test in the command line down here, what's going to actually happen is it's going to pick up on all of my projects and run them all together. So I'm going to say npx playwright test and click enter. And because I haven't specified a specific project, it's going to run everything we have in here. So I think I have 3. I've got Chrome, Safari mobile emulation, we got WebKit, and we've got Chromium. So you can see it running 4 tests using 4 workers, and it's just running this single basic test for us. They're all going to run in headed mode. The reason for this is because we've set up here, headless is set to false. Now, if I overrode it inside a specific project, one of them would be wouldn't have headed mode on. So on my other screen, they've all popped up. You can see now I've got the Chrome one here going through. That one's passed. My machine's running very slow, but what I can also do is grab over the next one. Popped up, and then there's another one over here, and they were pretty quick. So those 3 run. It's just waiting for another one while my machine is very slow today. Okay, great. So quickly, you can see that one now is opened up in that kind of emulated mode for us. Just wait for that to finish. So funny enough, in this example, I actually had some flaky tests, and this is because my machine is very slow. And as I was watching this, what was actually happening is the website wasn't loading in time. I think it's because I have some strange connection. But the principle of seeing the 4 projects being run is there. We talked about the HTML reporter. This is just opened up as well to show us what's gone on. As you can see, like I said, I have a very slow connection today, so it actually waited for that full 30-second timeout that we set in a global configuration value. What I can do is maybe I don't want to run all of the projects, and I only want to run, say, the Chromium. So what you can see here is each project has its own name. You can name these whatever you want. So I can change Chromium to commit quality. If I just save that, now I can actually say I want to run just this project, which is actually going to load up desktop Chrome. To do that, it's again npx playwright test, and then we need to pass through some flags to say what project I want to run. So it's space -- project equals, and then whatever the project name is. So I could say WebKit, commit quality, or whatever the other ones were down here, mobile Safari. In this case, I'm going to say commit quality. And now as I hit enter, what's going to happen is it's only going to run that one specific project. So it's not running all 4 projects for that single basic test anymore. Awesome. That was a lot quicker, which is really good. That opened up in headed mode as well, and it's passed, which is exactly what we wanted. So I guess the next thing I want to go through is actually creating a project for ourselves to see how we can do it rather than just speaking about it. So to do this, let's delete this Google Chrome project. And straight after the Chromium one, I want to add a new project in. So I'm going to say I need the name of the project, capital, name of the project to be test. Now you can name that whatever you want. Change it to anything, and as long as you have a valid string, it will completely fine. Then inside this, I'm going to say, let's update some of the usings. So let's say we want to turn traces off for this one. So by default, up above for all of the shared projects, we say in record a trace on retry. But here, I'm going to say trace off. And you can see, as I've done the double quote, it's given me what I needed. Maybe I want to record a video on this one. So I can say video, and I'm going to say on. And then let's change the base URL, because I think this is a good one for people to understand as well, and a really good example to show. So base URL is basically saying what's the URL you want this project to be. So let's keep this to Google. It's a nice simple one for us to do. So we can say base URL is google.com. Now we can keep it as this. I want to set the browser name to Chromium, so it loads up Chromium. Obviously I can change this to Firefox or WebKit as well. Hover over it and it tells us, you know, what we can pick through. So defaults to Chromium. So technically didn't need Chromium here. If I wanted to change it to Firefox or something else, then that's where you probably need it. But in this instance, I'm just going to say Chromium, and that should be enough for now. What I want to do is to show this base URL example, I'm going to go into my basic test. I'm just going to delete all of this, and I simply just want to go to await page.goto, and to bring in the URL, you just do quote and then the /. Now, if we wanted to go to say the URL and then something after it, we can say the / and say like about or help, and then that link will actually be, when executed, www.google.com, and then it's going to be / help or whatever we want. In this instance, I'm just saying load up the basic URL for us. I'm going to pause the page here as well, just so you can see it when it's loaded. So how do we run this new config we just created? And we touched on this when we were talking through the others. So it's npx playwright test, and then you want to do -- project equals whatever you've named yours. So if you've named yours test, that's what you need to type down here. If you don't add this in, what's going to happen is you're going to have both of these projects being executed. If you do have two, or if you have multiple, it's going to execute all of them. Of course, if you don't have, if you only have one project, then you don't need to add this because it'll automatically pick up on that only one for you. So I'm going to hit enter. So what we're going to see now is we should go to the Google Chrome page, and I should have the debugger open when it loads up. And I can show you that if I go over here. Just go in, and it's gone to Google Chrome because it's taken that value from our global configuration file. Great stuff. So let's close out of this. So what we've just gone through is the basics of the global setup for a Playwright config file. However, at the start of the video, I mentioned that you can override these values locally as well. So I want to show you this example. So by default, you're already aware that everything using this test project is going to have the base URL of google.com. But say you didn't want a specific test file or a specific test to have the base URL of Google. Maybe you wanted this to point to Amazon for whatever reason. We can do that locally and not having to change in every test file you have. You can just do it in the ones you want it to be changed. So to do this, I'm going to use basic test.ts. Now, what I'm going to say is test.use, and I'm going to set whatever properties I want. So I'm going to say browser, it's base URL to be Amazon. Now, this could be whatever you want, but I'm just picking on another well-known website. So I can say amazon.co.uk. Now, what this is going to do is, where this went to Google before, we are saying, okay, so our global file has a base URL of Google. However, when I actually come into this test, I want to use the base URL of amazon.co.uk. Now, it's worth mentioning you can do this inside your describe blocks or inside your test itself, or like I've done here for this file. So I'm going to quit out of that, and I'm going to rerun the test. Make sure that we have project of test, because there is no base URL set in the Chromium project. We've only done it in the one we just set up. But that doesn't matter, because what we're going to see is it's not going to go to Google. It's going to go to amazon.co.uk because we set it here. But if I was to run tests in any other file, it's going to go to Google because that's the global base URL. So let's click enter and wait for that to load. Great, so if I bring this over to this screen, you can see it's gone to amazon.co.uk. And that's a way of how you can change values locally as well. You know, this is just a very simple example, but there's no reason why maybe you want to change the viewport. You could do that here. You could say viewport, and let's pass through a width of, let's make it really small so we can see the difference. Width of 500 and a height of 500. Now, if I save that, and I continue through and click to execute this project equals test again, what we're going to see now is a very small viewport, which loaded up, and this is how it looks. And it's gone to Google because I removed the local config value that was setting up the base URL. This width would only be 500 for this test file as well. If I was to run the example specs, then they would load up with the normal width because we say, and let's change it locally. So that's the difference between doing a local setup and a global setup. Now, before we finish the video, I want to touch on, I haven't covered everything, or I've only really touched on a few of the configuration properties you can set up. I've shown you how to kind of create new projects, how you execute projects, how the other values are brought through. We've talked about local setup, but there's other videos I'm going to be covering off where, you know, in your config file, you can set up, you know, your state. So maybe log in once and then share that state across your tests. I'll show you that and how you split them per projects. I'll be showing you how you can add your own custom types here. So by default, you can only access whatever Playwright knows about. So I couldn't just say commit quality and then put any value in here because it doesn't know. You've got this error saying I don't know what it is. I'm going to be showing how you could pass through a custom type object where you can extend this as well. These are all going to come in future videos. As always, if you do need some help, I'd say definitely have a look at the configuration documentation here. There's a lot, it talks about emulation, about network, recording videos, which we kind of briefly touched on, and plenty more. All these are going to be covered in future videos as well. If there's something you urgently want covered, please drop a comment below and I'll happily prioritize that video. As always, a like and comment is appreciated, and please subscribe and have a great day.